Wyoming Territory, 1887, the wind howled across the dry plains as Caroline Rucker stepped off the last stagecoach she ever planned to ride. Dust clung to the hem of her faded burgundy skirt, and her gloved hands trembled just slightly as she clutched the handle of her carpetbag. She was 41, unmarried, and had long since stopped expecting her life to change. Folks had told her the same thing over and over again. She had missed her chance. Caroline glanced up at the wooden sign hanging crooked above the post office in the small town of Dry Creek. She let out a breath. This was it. A new start, even if she had no idea what that might look like. "Ma'am," a voice called from behind. She turned, and the first thing she noticed was the dust-covered hat in the man's hand, freshly removed in respect. The second thing was his eyes, calm, clear, and watchful like the Wyoming sky above them. "I reckon you are the new schoolteacher," he asked. "I am," she said, squinting against the sun. "Caroline Rucker, just arrived." He extended his hand. "Jackson Newcomb, I run cattle out west of here. My niece goes to the school, so I figured I'd offer you a ride to the boarding house." Caroline hesitated. It was not often a man offered help without expectation. She had learned that more than once. But Jackson stood with the quiet confidence of someone who did not need to prove anything, and his eyes didn't stray from her face. "I appreciate that," she said finally. "I would not mind the company." They rode in silence at first, the wagon creaking beneath them as they passed the livery, the mercantile, and a church still being built. Caroline watched the town unfold, small, worn, and touched with that mix of hope and grit she had always admired in places like this. Jackson cleared his throat. "You got family back east?" "No," she said. "No one left now. My father passed last winter." "After that, I decided it was time to stop waiting for something to happen and just go," he nodded. "That makes sense." She looked over at him. "You married?" "No," he said. "Not yet, not yet." The words sat between them like a stone in a still pond. The boarding house stood at the edge of town, white paint peeling but clean, with a narrow porch and a crooked fence. Jackson helped her down, and for a moment her hand stayed in his a second longer than was proper. "You need anything," he said. "You just send word. It is not much, this town, but the people here look out for each other." "I will remember that," she said. He tipped his hat and walked back toward his wagon, boots crunching over gravel. She watched him go, and something stirred in her chest, something she had not felt in a long time. The schoolhouse was a one-room affair with crooked windows and desks that had seen better decades. Still, Caroline kept it tidy, and by her second week the children began to smile when they arrived. One of them, a girl no older than 8, lingered after class one day. "Miss Rucker?" she asked, hugging her slate to her chest. "Yes, Hannah. Uncle Jackson says you are good at reading stories. I like stories." Caroline smiled. "Well, then we are going to get along fine." After that, Hannah Newcomb stayed late nearly every afternoon. She helped clean chalkboards and stack readers. Caroline learned that Hannah's parents had died in a fire 2 years ago. Jackson had taken her in without hesitation. "He is not like most men," Hannah said once. "He listens." That evening, Caroline walked back to the boarding house with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She thought about Jackson's hands, how steady they had been guiding the horses on that first day, and the way he had looked at her, not with pity but with quiet recognition. 3 weeks later, Caroline found herself outside Jackson's ranch house, holding a basket of books and a jar of preserved peaches she had made herself. She had no idea why she had come, only that she had. Jackson opened the door wearing a shirt with the sleeves half rolled and her breath caught. He did not speak, just stepped aside to let her in. "I brought some books for Hannah," she said, "and peaches." His smile was soft and real. "She will be glad. She has been asking if you would visit." The evening passed gently. Hannah read aloud from one of the books while Caroline mended the hem of her dress. Jackson sat nearby, whittling a small horse from a block of pine. The fire crackled in the hearth, and outside the wind had stilled. When it came time to leave, Jackson walked her to the wagon. "You know," he said, looking out toward the stars. Folks around here talk. They say you are too old to still be unmarried. Caroline's stomach twisted. She had heard it before, always behind closed doors or with a tight smile. She nodded. They do. He turned to her, his voice steady. They are wrong, she blinked. Why do you say that? Because you are not too old, he said. You are perfect for me. The words landed with a quiet force. Honest, sure, she stared at him, too stunned to speak. I know what I want, he added. I am not a man who rushes into things, but I would like to see you again if you will let me. Caroline felt her throat tighten. The wind picked up again, but it was warm now, brushing against her cheek like a promise. I would like that very much, she whispered. And then not a kiss, not yet, but he reached out and took her hand, held it like something precious. Caroline did not pull away. For the first time in a long, long while she felt seen. Not as someone past her prime, not as a woman who had waited too long, but as someone worth loving. And something in her heart, something buried deep, began to stir back to life. By early October, the cottonwoods along the creek behind the schoolhouse had turned to gold, their leaves whispering in the breeze like gossiping old souls. Caroline stood at the window after the last child had gone, watching the light shift across the hills. Her hands still smelled faintly of chalk, and her back ached in the familiar way it always did after a long day on her feet. She didn't mind. The ache reminded her she was needed here. That evening, she brought a wrapped parcel to the mercantile, a small shawl she'd mended for Mrs. Ellis, the storekeeper's wife. As she stepped inside, she noticed a hat she recognized resting on the counter. Worn felt and sweat darkened at the band. Jackson was turned slightly away, speaking with the storekeeper in his low, even tone. Caroline hesitated, but he caught her in his periphery and turned. His gaze held hers without hesitation, and something unspoken passed between them. He didn't approach at once, just finished his conversation and took his time tying a bundle of dry goods with twine. Then he walked to her side. You working late again? He asked. I had a few things to finish, she said. You're stocking up, he nodded. Got a neighbor sick out near the ridge. I'm bringing them supplies tomorrow. They've got young ones and no one else to tend them. She studied his face, weathered but not worn down, eyes steady. You're a good man, Jackson. He looked at her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly, not in pride but quiet amusement. I try to do right. That's all. There was a pause. Then he nodded toward the door. Walk you home? Outside, the air had turned sharp. The sky burned orange above the hills, and the road back to the boarding house was quiet except for the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. You ever miss it? Jackson asked after a while. Miss what? The life back east, more folks, paved streets, grand churches. She thought a moment. I miss the libraries, the quiet of them. But I don't miss the way people looked at me, like I was less than whole because I'd never married. He didn't speak right away, just looked ahead, jaw shifting slightly, then his voice came low. A woman's worth ain't in who marries her. Never has been, far as I'm concerned. She stopped walking, turned to him. You really believe that? I do, he said. A person's worth comes from how they live, not what others expect of them. The wind picked up, pulling a strand of her hair loose. She tucked it behind her ear, then glanced at his hands, scarred, strong, calloused. They were not the hands of a man used to soft things. You've lived honest, she said. You've raised a child that wasn't yours. You give when it costs you something. He shifted his weight, eyes on hers. And you? You've built something here with nothing but your will and your back. You gave these children a way to see the world. That's no small thing. She felt the words settle inside her, not like flattery, but as truth. When they reached the steps of the boarding house, he didn't move to leave right away. Caroline, he said, voice quieter now, I don't want to be forward, but I'd like for you and Hannah to come out to the ranch one Sunday. Spend the afternoon. No reason but good food and company, she considered. You cook. I make a fair stew. And I keep a neighbor woman around who knows her way around biscuits. I'll bring a pie, she said. He grinned. Then it's settled. She turned toward the door, then paused. Jackson, he looked up. I never expected to feel wanted. Not at this point in my life. He stepped closer, not touching her, just near enough she could feel his warmth in the cooling air. "You're not just wanted, you're seen. There's a difference." It was the first time in years she felt something unravel inside her, not falling apart, but loosening. Making room, he tipped his hat, stepped back, and walked into the dusk. She watched his figure fade toward the stables, then turned and stepped inside, her heart quiet but no longer still. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and wood smoke as Caroline stepped down from the wagon, her Sunday boots crunching over the dry grass beside Jackson's ranch house. Hannah had fallen asleep halfway through the ride, her head against Caroline's arm, and now stirred reluctantly as Jackson lifted her down with practiced ease. "She's heavier than she looks," he said, shifting her gently onto his hip. "She's growing," Caroline replied, smoothing the girl's hair. "She's always hungry, that's the first sign." Jackson chuckled low in his throat and nodded toward the front porch. "Come on inside, supper's about ready." The house smelled of stew and fresh bread, and there was a simple cotton cloth laid across the table. A pot of late-season wildflowers rested in the center, sunflowers and Indian paintbrush, gathered from the edge of the pasture. Caroline set her pie near the hearth to cool and glanced around. The interior was worn but well kept, with a few wooden shelves lined with books and a woven throw folded neatly over the arm of a rocking chair. "You've kept this place with care," she said. Jackson ladled stew into bowls without looking up. "Had to, after Hannah came. A child notices things. And I figure if I want her to grow up steady, she needs to see a man take pride in what's his." Caroline helped set the table, placing tin cups beside each plate. "It shows. She feels safe here. You've given her that." Jackson took a seat across from her, his eyes steady. "You've given her something too. She's talking more, laughing again. You didn't just bring lessons, Caroline, you brought light." They ate in quiet comfort, broken only by the sounds of spoons against bowls and Hannah humming softly to herself. After supper, the girl took a book to the corner and curled up on a braided rug, flipping pages with the intensity only a child can hold when the world of words has opened to them. Caroline stood and began clearing dishes, but Jackson stopped her with a touch to her wrist. "You're a guest," he said. "Let me." She hesitated. "I've never known a man who thought that way." He met her gaze as he gathered the plates. "Maybe you've only known men who didn't learn proper." They moved together easily, not speaking much but not needing to. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fields. When the last dish was dried, Jackson poured 2 mugs of coffee from a pot kept warm on the stove and led her outside to the porch. They sat close but not touching, the quiet wrapping around them like a quilt. The land rolled out before them, open and wide, with a few cattle grazing near the fence line. A coyote called in the distance. "Do you ever think about what you want beyond the next day?" Caroline asked, voice low. Jackson didn't answer right away. "I used to, before Hannah. Used to think I'd build a herd big enough to hire hands, maybe take a trip down to Colorado Springs, see something outside these hills. And now," he looked out over the land, "now I think about steady things, a warm roof, a child who laughs. Someone to share the quiet with at the end of the day." Caroline's breath caught, but she kept her voice calm. "You've built a life worth sharing. I'd like to share it with you." He didn't look at her when he said it. Just kept his eyes on the horizon like the words had been waiting there all along. Caroline turned to him. "You mean that?" He nodded. "I've watched how you carry yourself, how you don't flinch from hard things. You've got a strength in you that settles the room, I see it. I've never wanted anything loud or grand, just something real." She felt the rough grain of the porch rail beneath her fingertips. "I stopped believing I'd be chosen, that someone would look at me and see a beginning, not an ending." Jackson shifted toward her then, slow and sure. "You're not at the end of anything, Caroline. You're right where you're meant to be, and I don't want to miss my chance." She reached out, her hand finding his. Their fingers laced without hesitation, his palm warm and solid beneath hers. "I'm not afraid of the quiet," she said. "So long as it's shared." He nodded once, and they sat like that until the stars came out, their hands still joined, the future unfolding slowly like the land itself, wide, steady, and full of promise. The November morning broke with a sky the color of river slate and a hush over the land that made every sound feel louder: wagon wheels in the distance, a crow's cry from a fence post, the rustle of Caroline's skirts as she stepped from the schoolhouse stoop into the lean chill. She had agreed to help the pastor's wife prepare for the Thanksgiving gathering, and her arms were full with a bundle of linens and a crock of root vegetables wrapped in a towel. "Miss Rucker," a voice called from behind, low and sure. She turned, careful not to drop the crock. Jackson approached on horseback, Hannah riding in front of him, her mittens tight around the pommel. The girl's cheeks were red from wind, and her braids bounced with each step of the gelding beneath them. "We came to offer a ride," Jackson said, dismounting with ease. "I figured no sense you walking with all that in your arms." Caroline tilted her head. "You're up early." His mouth lifted slightly at the corner. "Cows don't wait for a warm sun." He reached for the bundle without asking and secured it to the back of the saddle while Hannah leaned toward Caroline, whispering, "He made me wear 2 pairs of stockings." "Good man," Caroline murmured with a smile, helping her up onto the horse again. She mounted behind Jackson, settling carefully, and they rode toward the church, the wind tugging at her shawl and the scent of pine from the nearby woods sharp in the air. Inside the church kitchen, the pastor's wife set them to work peeling potatoes and trimming turnips. Hannah helped at the table, her small hands nimble, while Jackson brought in firewood and then stayed to mend a loose hinge on the back door without being asked. "You don't often see a man with quiet hands," the pastor's wife said once Jackson stepped outside to tend the firewood stack. "He doesn't say a lot, but you can feel the way he means what he does." Caroline didn't answer, just folded a dish towel and pressed it flat along the edge of the counter. When the meal was done and pies cooling on the windowsills, Jackson caught Caroline's sleeve near the coat rack. "Come out a minute," he said. She followed him into the side yard where the wind had settled and the sun hung low, pale gold through the bare limbs of the cottonwoods. He held out a small object, a brooch carved from antler, smoothed and shaped into the form of a leaf. "I found it near the creek 2 winters back," he said. "Always meant to give it to someone, just never knew who until now." Caroline traced the shape with her thumb. It was simple, but the care in it was plain. "Why a leaf? They hold on as long as they can," he said. "Most folks think they're dying when they fall, but I always thought they just moved on to something quieter." She looked up at him, the breeze catching her skirt, the brooch warm from his hand. "You made this," he nodded. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say a thing," he said. "But if you'll wear it, I'd be proud." Her fingers closed around it and she nodded. That night the boarding house was still when she returned. She lit the oil lamp in her room and sat at the washstand, staring at her reflection. The brooch rested beside her comb. She picked it up, fastened it at the hollow of her throat, and studied the way it caught the lamplight. When she lay down, she didn't feel the usual ache in her chest that sleep often brought. Instead, she listened to the wind brushing against the glass and thought of Jackson's hands shaping antler into something tender. She was not waiting anymore. She was beginning. The roof leaked in one slow, steady drop above the stove, and Caroline set a tin pan beneath it with a sigh. The boarding house had weathered another early snow poorly, and the landlady, Mrs. Croft, was down with the influenza that had begun creeping through Dry Creek. Caroline had spent the morning tending to her, boiling water and wringing out cloths, while Hannah sat at the foot of the bed, whispering stories from a school reader to pass the time. Jackson had ridden in at midday, his coat heavy with snowmelt, his face drawn with the look of a man who hadn't slept well. He'd brought word that the western trail had frozen early, and 2 of his calves had been found dead near the creek. Still, he stayed long enough to split a stack of wood and carry up water before heading back into the cold. That evening, with Mrs. Croft resting and the fire burning low, Caroline pulled the curtains closed and folded herself into the rocker. Her needle moved steadily through the patchwork she'd started when she first arrived, scraps of old dresses, bits of flour sack, a square from her father's travel coat. Her fingers moved on instinct, but her thoughts stayed with Jackson. By the time the town gathered for the winter social in the church barn, the snow had crusted firm over the earth, and Caroline wore her second-best dress beneath her wool coat. Inside, lanterns hung from the rafters, their glow warming the frost that clung to the windows. Children darted between the benches, and the air smelled of molasses and roasted apples. Jackson found her near the back, his hands scrubbed clean, a fresh shirt tucked into his trousers. He didn't offer his arm or ask anything outright. He simply stood beside her and said, "I'm glad you came." She glanced up. "I wasn't sure I would. I was hoping you would." They didn't dance. Neither of them leaned toward that kind of attention. But they walked together when the music began, stepping outside into the stillness behind the barn where the moon lit the snow in soft silver. He handed her a mug of cider, warm through the tin, and they stood close enough to share the heat between them. "I finally fixed the shed door," he said. "Been meaning to for weeks." Caroline smiled into her cup. "What else have you been meaning to do?" His breath lingered in the air for a moment. "Tell you I want you beside me, not just for suppers and quiet evenings, for the life I've got left." She didn't speak right away. The barn behind them pulsed with laughter and fiddle music, but out here, it was only the sound of wind in the bare trees and the steady beat of her own heart. "I've lived a long time waiting to feel like I belonged somewhere," she said. "I didn't know it would be here." "Or with you." His hand found hers, rough and real. "Then let's stop waiting." They married by candlelight in the parlor of the church, just after the thaw. Hannah wore a ribbon in her hair the color of faded cornflowers, and Jackson stood taller than Caroline had ever seen him, his hand steady in hers as the pastor spoke. They moved into the ranch house together, hanging her quilt in the bedroom and placing her father's books on the shelf beside Jackson's ledgers. She brought order to the kitchen, a rhythm to the days, while he taught her how to mend a fence and spot illness in cattle before it took hold. Hannah grew like a wildflower, her laughter stretching into every corner of the house. She read by lamplight in the evenings while Caroline stitched and Jackson carved, and when spring came, she planted violets beside the porch steps. They faced hard seasons, as all people did. There were lean years and sickness, storms that scattered fence lines and calves born too early, but they weathered them side by side. Jackson never pulled away when grief or doubt crept in through old doors. Caroline never turned from the quiet weight he carried from years spent alone. And in the long evenings when the house was still and the land lay wide and open beneath the stars, they sat on the porch and held hands, not out of habit, but because it still felt new, still felt right. They didn't speak of time lost. Only of what they had now, a life built not from chance, but choice. A love not born in fire, but in steady kindness, in shared work and earned trust. Hannah grew into a woman with her aunt's sharp mind and her uncle's calm heart. She married the blacksmith's boy and built her home just a few hills over, where the wind still touched the grass the same way it always had. And Caroline and Jackson grew older, but never apart. They rose early and rested easy. They loved without noise, without spectacle, but with a depth that never frayed. In the end, it wasn't grand gestures or declarations that defined them. It was the way he passed her the sugar without being asked, the way she waited for him at the gate when the cattle ran late, the way they lived fully, quietly together. And through all their days that never changed.